First of all, my name is Chad McDaniel. I'm president of Execs in the Know, and I'll be today's moderator and kind of co-panelist also. Really looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you for your time and being part of this important discussion. I have a couple of quick housekeeping items that I want to give to our listeners before I get into some data points. We'll be taking your questions during the webinar, and at the end, for sure, please make sure to ask your questions that you have on your mind, as we'll try to answer these for the audience. I think it always helps if these are questions on your mind. There's probably questions on others' minds, so we want to make sure we get those included. Tomorrow, Wednesday, you'll receive a link from today's recording of this webinar. Feel free to pass this along to your network as we hope you'll find today's conversation of value. So that link will be sent to your inbox tomorrow for the recording. Also important, I really like to request and ask all of our attendees, as you exit the webinar today, please take a brief survey on the webinar and conversation. Your input is most helpful in ensuring we stay on target today's conversation. So I really would appreciate your input. Only takes a couple of minutes, and you'll get that link shortly thereafter. So I want to tell you a little bit about Execs in the Know as today's moderator here. Execs in the Know, we've built a reputation of excellence for the customer management industry, and we have a worldwide community of about 50,000 customer management professionals. And I think really what we've been pushing is to be your advocate, really trying to push thought leadership, content, and current trends, peer-to-peer collaboration, networking, and a variety of things impacting today's customer professional. Examples of this can be seen at our Customer Response Summit events, our live events, our roadshows, our webinars, our workshops, our blog talk radio, our benchmarking blogs. There's many ways we're trying to create best practice sharing amongst the customer management executives. So I'd continue, if you've not visited our website, please do so, execsintheknow.com. There's lots of information on there that we try to put out there to help today's customer management professional. I'd like to introduce to you, these are our corporate advisory board members of Execs in the Know, and I'm just so proud of these individuals. And my sincere appreciation of their dedication to customer-first culture. You know, what's amazing to me is that each of these respective executives and their brands are committed to the advancing of the overall industry of customer success and sharing best practice strategies. I really have appreciated their commitment to this. All of them are champions within their respective brands of customer success, and they have been just great advocates within our industry trying to advance the learning and sharing amongst customer success strategies, so I welcome them. As I introduce our guest facilitators, what I'd like to say to all of our listeners, again, thank you so much for being part of today's conversation, and why, for myself personally, I wanted to have this conversation. As we all know, we continue to live in an era ever-changing, where society and communication preference and tools available are much greater than years past. You know, if we all think within our own brand, have you seen or experienced changing customer demands for increased convenience, efficiency, and effectiveness? And I'd probably say 100% of you probably say yes. What has this done alone to the overall data influx and dilemma now we face as customer management executives is paramount. I could get into many examples, but as we continue to look at how we best service our customer and create that customer experience within various channels, it becomes, as I said, paramount. So what I'm really hopeful is through today's conversation, we can take some small advancements and learnings on how to help you create the ultimate customer experience regardless of channel, or where you actually, your maturity may sit in the brand when it comes into multi-channel customer experience engagement. So I've asked a couple of industry experts to join myself on today's call, and I'm very grateful of their time, their planning and preparation for today's conversation, and try to ensure you get the most out of today. Dan Gordon, our SVP Strategy and Development from West Interactive, and Chris Toon, the product manager from Customer eServices and ADT. Thank you so much, Dan and Chris. And as most of you may know, West Interactive is a leader in innovative customer experience and technology integration solutions. that enable seamless communication with their customer across all channels. If you're not familiar with West Interactive, I would highly encourage you to look into how they're driving customer success within their client groups. Dan, you've been a great advocate and a leader in this space, and thank you for your time. Now, ADT, some of you may already be a customer of ADT, and we're all very familiar with the brand. ADT is a leader provider of security and automation solutions for both homes and businesses in U.S. and Canada. And ADT employs, I think, over 17,000 people, over 200 locations. So, Chris and Dan, it's a real pleasure to have you, and I'll introduce you a little bit more as we get closer. So, what I'd like to do is just to kind of get us all thinking here, we're going to open up a poll, and I want to direct everyone's attention to the screen if you could. And the first question I'm going to ask, let's just get a read of the audience here. The question is, what channel do you think is most engaging for your customers? Now, I know it could be different depending on your industry, but take a minute. I'll give you 30 seconds. Just click on here, put chat, self-service, phone, email, social. You only get one vote. We're going to show these polls here in a second, but let's see what the audience says, and I'm going to go back to that comment. So, again, probably about 20 seconds left. I see you voting. Thank you. And we're going to count down 10 more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alyssa, please close the poll, and let's show the results. So I hope all of you can see the results. It's interesting. The question is, what channel do you think is the most engaging for your customers? And the results came out to 33% said phone and 27% said self-service. A little surprised by that, myself, Chad, personally here. I was thinking self-service may have the lion's share. It's a close second, but it's interesting to see the phone, and I have some data facts that we're going to talk about here shortly. So thank you for participating in that poll, and if you'd like a copy of that result, we can get it to you if you want to have that benchmark. So one thing I'd like to let our listeners on the phone know today, if you haven't used Execs&Know as a resource, please do so. And if you go to our site, execsandknow.com, under the Resources tab, there's a plethora of different kinds of content, benchmark studies, research, other things we're putting out there for the customer management professional. They're free. They're able for your download. You should take a look at them. And the reason I'm bringing this to your attention is that I'm going to reference from a couple of slides to one of our recent studies we did on the consumer side. So if we could move to the next slide here, when we asked a question, this was done on a consumer survey this past summer, 2014. We asked consumers which characteristic of interaction with the brand's customer service department is most important to you? When you think of how they want to service with you or how they want to get problem resolution. And obviously 49, or I think it was 40% of them said effective issue resolution was the most important thing to them, followed by immediacy and fast response. Interesting that we see that. So as customer management professionals today, we need to stay on top of these expectations and do our best to meet and exceed them. And I know Dan and Chris are going to get into some of this as we get into the webinar today. What was also interesting, we took it a level further, and all of this data is on these reports that we have on our website. I'm just giving you a couple of real quick tidbits here. We asked the question to the consumers that we polled last summer about, are care organizations meeting your expectations? And 78% said no, while only 22% said yes. And I had to kind of give my head a shake and say, what is going on here in this data? You know, as this continues to drive the conversation for us as professionals, what are we doing to change this? We have some work to do. When we do the consumer report this summer, it'll be interesting to see how that particular metric may change or come to our favor. We broke it down a little further, and we went to utilization by channel, by industry. And from the same consumer survey we conducted this past summer in 2014, we broke it down by industry and the volume of consumer contacts by channel and also by industry sector. The industry mix, however, was no surprises today. Regardless of industry, traditional care telephone continues to dominate volume of all channels, and I would assume you would say the same exists within your organization. In fact, I think from the poll question, phone 33% said, I think that was the channel that people most preferred to do business with us in there, so that resonates. But the question, I think, would be, where do we see this volume, or do we see a volume shift in the next 5 years, if any? And I think self-service is going to give a good run as we look forward. And Dan and Chris, as we talk visioneering forward too, I want to pick a little bit more into your thoughts on some of the channel mix that we're heading. And then my last slide I want to call out from that consumer report. I think the consumer report had over 48 data charts. I'm only going through a couple of quick ones here. We asked about the outcome of negative experience or customer experience. You know, again, I think as us service professionals on this call, no major surprises with this slide. However, it reinforced the facts that we've all been hearing. We asked how likely or unlikely is it that you would share a negative experience with the brand's customer service department with friends or family. 71% said very likely. Again, I don't think any surprise. It's just a reinforcement. And then the second question we asked, these were the consumers that participated in the survey, would this affect your future purchase decisions to the negative? And they said 68% very likely it would negatively affect their decision on future purchases. So while businesses need to be aware of the impact of word of mouth, they also need to understand how a customer service experience can shape purchase decisions. And again, I think we're all huge advocates of that. So let's, Dan, I'm going to have you, if I may, I really want to get into the conversation. And again, if any of our listeners, you'd like to get a full PDF of that report, email me, chad@execsintheknow.com. I'm happy to send it as an attachment. You can see the full consumer report. We conducted last summer and send it along your way. So with that, Dan, I would love you to take just a couple minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I really want to get started in the conversation here.
Yeah, and I thank you for the introduction, Chad, and everybody on the phone. Thanks for joining us. I'd really like to spend some time, and I think there's real value in real-life examples, and we're going to have Chris Toon from ADT speak to those real-life examples as much as we can. So I will spend a little bit of time doing some setup. My name's Dan Gordon with West. I'm in the Interactive Services group of the West business, and I'm responsible for how we take our business to market. Ranging from marketing and M&A activities all the way through some of the sales support activities. So we're fortunate enough to work with companies like ADT and have people like Chris help us tell stories around how they're using some of our services to improve the customer experience. So without further delay, we'll have Chris join us here in a couple minutes. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time providing some context for the conversation that we're going to engage in. And we talked about, you'll see multi-channel mayhem. We talked about actually naming this the accidental contact center. And if you're on the phone, you're operating a contact center, whether you really like it or not. And I'll explain that here in a minute. But before we get started, we're going to take another quick poll and get your input from a recent study that Loud House did across 7,000 people from 7 different countries. What percentage of customers say that brands must work harder to create a seamless customer experience? So we'll give you a couple of seconds here, 20, 30 seconds to provide us your response. And we'll share the results here in a second.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the poll, Dan. Let's show the results here. And thank you for everyone's participation in that poll. And now you should be seeing the results.
Yep, no surprise. It's a big number. It's 87%. So let's go back to this notion of this accidental contact center and why customers and why brands are working so hard to create the seamless experience. So Alyssa, if you'll hit the next slide, there we go. You know, we have this notion of this traditional contact center, and if you're close to my age, you'll recognize that rotary dial phone. But it used to be this notion that people called a brick-and-mortar contact center, a call center, and they connected to an agent. And we use metrics such as ASA and AHT and wrap time and all of those kind of traditional contact center metrics. And then, as you guys all know what happened, channels began to emerge, and mobility changed the landscape and the access points, and organizations ended up with this view of this contact center. And Alyssa, if you hit the next slide, they ended up with this mess, if you will, where you've got multiple devices, multiple access points, all trying to integrate together. So you'll see that there's access, but is there connectivity? Maybe there's connectivity between these channels, but is there context between these channels? And maybe there's context, but is there integration of that context between those channels? So very few organizations can say that yeah, I can answer all of those questions. Yes, across the board, we've got connectivity, we've got context, we've got integration. So you look at this picture, and I'm sure many of you on the phone are saying, yeah, that kind of looks like us. That kind of represents our business a little bit. So what is your customer experience when you have this kind of contact center that looks like this? So Alyssa, if you hit the next slide, you'll see that your customers kind of have this reaction and of this is not the experience that I intended it to be. And we can all share stories about flights that have been delayed or seat assignments that have been changed, and you get a text message and you respond to the text message and it goes nowhere, or you click the call button on the text message and the agent answers the phone and they ask you what you're calling about. And your reaction is like, you guys just canceled my flight. What do you mean? What am I calling about? You should not only know what I'm calling about, but you should know who I am, and you should put me in a place where that problem can be solved. You can reroute me and you can solve my my delayed flight or my canceled flight pretty quickly. But yet, we've had this experience where you repeat the same information, your frequent flyer number, your route, all of those things, just to solve one interaction. And customers, brands, look at some of those interactions as, hey, yep, we sent the text message, that was good. First call resolution or first contact resolution is all good. Then the IVR is like, yep, we routed Dan to the right spot, we're good there. And then the agent, maybe transfers once or twice or, maybe once, and like, yep, we solved this problem. And the reality is, I went through 3 channels to solve a single interaction, and it's just not a great experience. So, what is that contact center of the future, or what's that contact center look like that we're all reaching for today? No surprise, you've got a single platform or a single place within your organization where the channels are connected. Oftentimes, maybe it's run or owned by a chief customer experience officer, or maybe it's owned by a single department. The data is easily streamed between these channels and shared between these channels so that these individual channels and functions are operating off of the same data set. The data is being used not just to address the current problem, but to really change the business process that is causing customer friction and customer frustration. So we can all see that this is what we're shooting for, no surprise, and your customer has a significantly different experience than an experience where the channels aren't connected and I have to repeat information between web and voice and IVR. So again, no surprise. So if you click the next slide, Alyssa, your customers go back to this flight example. Really, you get the text message that your flight's canceled. The ideal experience would be, I'm provided some different options in that text message. I can click on that text message, pick the flight, and it books me right away. Or I can or I can hit a click to call button. I get to an agent that recognizes me based on my phone number, recognizes me based on the outreach they just made to me, and understands, oh, you're in Chicago and you need to get back out to Denver for the meeting, and we can solve that for you right away. Let me give you an option. Here's your flight times. So there's ways to do this. It's just a matter of, where do I start building that optimal contact center? So Alyssa, if you hit that next slide. So it's interesting that the poll results at the front end of the survey, Chad, were related to the phone, because there are so many places to start and so many ways to start. But I think we can all agree the way to go about starting it is to keep it pretty simple, and start with places and channels or functions within channels that you can do well, so you can solve a customer experience that is meaningful today. So Chris, I'm going to ask you to speak to some of the projects and programs that we've worked on together, so we can kind of set the stage for the rest of the conversation.
Sure. So some of the things that I've worked with West on is initially we started with our Care IVR, which is our main customer-facing IVR for our existing customers. And this is kind of our first step into kind of changing our customer experience. And so we rolled this out, our new IVR with West in conjunction, and that was in 2012. And then since then, we've kind of been building on this steadily. So when we first rolled out and had 100% of our coverage going to this IVR, we were probably sitting at 1 million calls per month. And as time has gone by, we slowly are appointing additional billing numbers. We've slowly moved some custom home, our custom home business units, our phone numbers over there. We're moving to put our home health services into our Care IVR now. And so we've been slowly ramping up our volume, and right now we're sitting at 1.6, and we're looking to even hit the 2 million mark around the end of June. And so that's kind of where we started at. And then we wanted to kind of build on top of that by migrating to kind of a natural IVR. So when we first rolled out, it was basically a DTMF and ASR type solution. And now since then, we've added also the natural language element where you can kind of just allow your customers to say open-ended phrases and reasons why they're calling, and we're able to parse through those. As well, shortly after going live with kind of the inbound side, we also started working with some outbound notifications, specifically around install appointment confirmations, where we were looking to not only confirm the appointment with the customer as far as date and time, but also looking to get some feedback from them on the readiness. We call it site readiness, but it's do you have the necessary things we need to install our systems? Do you have a phone line? Do you have internet for our high-end systems? And do you have power? And so we would get these site readiness, collect those from some outbound campaigns that we're having. We're able to update our back-end systems with that information. And if you answered in the negative to any of those mandatory items, then we were able to transfer you to an agent so that we could reschedule. And then shortly after that, we've also rolled out service appointment notifications, which is very similar, but we don't have to worry about the site readiness, so it's more of just kind of a message blast. And then even currently, we're working on inspection reminder campaigns, which is very similar. And then so recently, really kicking up this year, we've really kind of expanded the scope and are now migrating our sales IVR over into this, and then also our technicians IVR, which is kind of it's an internal system for our technicians to call for various things that they need.
I got it. So thanks, Chris. And so starting small, kind of keeping it simple, adding progressively to a solution that works, and there's been some obviously some demonstrated value in those channels. So I'm going to take a quick poll of the audience and ask them the best place that you feel you should start when developing your customer experience. So we'll take about 20 seconds or so to kind of poll the audience. We know where ADT started. I'd like to get some feedback and some ideas as to the audience and where you think the best place to start is. I feel like playing the Jeopardy kind of theme song here, Chad.
It's interesting. We had discussed our own internal perspective, and seeing some of the results coming in, it's great to see the audience thoughts too. So we're going to close this poll down now, and we're going to show you the results. Hopefully all of you can now see those results. Dan, reaction?
Web, voice, social media, very little SMS, and a little bit of email. I think that the answer is what's relevant to your business. I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. I think the answer is unique to your business, and I think some of the answer, I'm sure, is interwoven with or contingent upon things like, where are my customers? Where are they interacting with me today? Where are they communicating? What channels are they using, and how are they using that channel to communicate? And in some respects, I'm sure you're also weaving in what can I control and where can I get some of the organization's buy-in and support. So there's probably a couple of different factors that influenced how people responded, how you responded. It's not surprising that voice and website were the two primary places. Certainly there's a lot of traffic driven in both of those channels and both of those technologies.
And Dan, when you say website, you also are talking self-serve, all self-service through interactive care?
Yeah, as long as it's web-driven. So if you might want to consider chat in there. But I think there's an experience that is happening on your website, whether it's one-way or two-way today. And oftentimes, I think people, consumers, whether you're a patient, a buyer, a parent, a lot of that communication, a lot of that research, if you will, is happening on the web. And integration of the web into those other channels, I think, is a place that people think, obviously consumers and brands think is a place that needs to be connected into this, sort of accidental contact center.
And just quickly, Dan, before we move on, we'll go back to Chris. There was a question that came in for you, Chris, just a clarification of what initially was the problem you were trying to solve, or what was the problem you were having. Just a clarification. And then I'll add a second piece, Chris, just for the listeners' benefit, a little bit about your accountability and role there so we know exactly what you've got responsibilities and sort of your mandate, and I think it all puts it into context.
Sure. So, yeah, just a little bit about my role. So I am the product manager for the IVR at ADT. I've been doing this since the beginning of 2012, and actually before that I was involved with the redesign of the myadt.com, so I do have some experience with both web and now IVR. One of the big drivers for us was mostly around internal transfers. So once our call drops into the call agents, we'd still have the case where we have really high transfer rates. And so this was kind of the initial problem that we wanted to solve, is to kind of reduce those transfers, have each call is only talking to a single agent, not being passed around. Part of the solution for that is to make sure that we're actually pulling as much data about our customer back to the IVR so that the IVR can make intelligent decisions. So an example would be if we know the type of system that you have, then we can gauge effectively the type of support that you're going to need. So we have a general population pool that can troubleshoot the normal systems, but when you get into the high-end systems like our Pulse, Premier, and our Advantage solutions, the general population folks are not able to troubleshoot those. So if we actually know which type of system you have, and then you're saying technical support, or my alarm is beeping, then we know that we should send you to this higher trained group rather than general population. Another example for us is just is making sure that we know as much account info that we have. Is ADT very often acquires other businesses, and it leads a lot of times to us having multiple billing systems. And this is a problem that is kind of it's been reduced somewhat in the past recent year. But when I first started, we had 4 different billing systems, right? And then there were different teams that would support each one of those billing systems. So our billing agents were only trained for one system. So it was very important that we actually were able to know which billing system you were a part of, so we could actually get you to the right agents. So I think the genesis of this project was mostly around our high transfer rates internally with our call centers, and then the other thing is now it's kind of a deflection of the call centers by providing self-service in the IVR itself. So you have your self-service in myadt, and now we also want to offer as much self-service in the IVR as possible.
Thank you. And so Dan, I don't know if you have any reaction or comment to that, but we've got a lot more to discuss.
No, that's great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for the insight. And I think what you're hearing is imperfect progress is much better than delayed perfection. And so if you start small and start in a way where you can gain some momentum and some traction internally, you'll find other opportunities to sort of build on top of that, right? So if we kind of look at the transition from that to, how do I ensure that I know my customers? We can all start small, and we can all start simply, and that's great. So I'll go back to the poll question. Why did you answer the way that you did with respect to what channel to start in? I'm sure, like I said, it has in part to do something with your customer and where they're learning and where they're interacting with your brand and your business, and how do you get to know them. And so we're curious. We're going to take another quick poll to find out how many of you guys on the phone, people on the phone, have taken time to be your customer and to go through your business as your customer, your patient, or your parent, or whoever your end user is. How many of you guys have gone through that experience and really understand what your customer goes through in having an experience with your brand?
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and close that quickly and show the results. We had some bets on this answer too. We'll see what the results are.
Yeah, it's quite a few people that have actually gone through the experience as their customers have intended, and so that's a really valuable exercise in understanding a comparative view of what you think your customer experience is and how you're designing the experience to what they actually experience and what some of the gaps are. So if we just kind of go back to Chris and talk about a little bit about the integration of inbound and outbound to the solution that you're providing your customers. What kinds of things did you guys learn about your customers and the segments of your customers, and how you might be treating those segments of your customers differently based on what you learned in going through that exercise yourself?
Well, there's a couple of things that I kind of wanted to hit here. So one of the big ones that we found, and this was actually before we even migrated to natural language. This is when we just basically had the basic IVR, what's called in as DTMF and ASR, and we would basically offer the type of options like your alarm is going off, or troubleshooting, your billing and some of your sales stuff. Well, for us as an industry, what happens a lot is when your alarm goes off, we actually have our agents are making outbound calls to you and the people that are on your contact list. And those people that are on your contact list that you want to be called may or may not be customers of ours. And so what inevitably happens is we will usually reach somebody who will tell us, it was just a false alarm and whatnot, and so we're good there. But then what happens is all the other people that we called actually start to call back. And we are seeing that there's just not a real good way to capture these people. So upon seeing that data, that was one of the big things that we wanted with natural language. And indeed, it turns out to be one of the top 5 reasons people call is they're actually returning a call from us. And in some cases, we actually know what it's about. So we've integrated the appointment situation pretty well. So when we make outbound calls to you about appointments, and then you call back in on our main IVR, we would actually that's part of the data set that we pull back is, do you have any upcoming appointments? And so we'll do the outbound dials for our appointments 48 hours in advance, but we can see appointments on the inbound side up to a week and even a little further. And so we can actually ask the customer or the caller, are you calling about your appointment? And we have a few of these type of predictive intents in the IVR where we try to guess the reason why you're calling based off of the information that we pull back. So that was one thing that we're able to see. And expanding on the return calls, we don't have all the answers yet, and we don't have all the back-end integration that we're really looking for. But as the next step past now the natural language, where at least the customer can now tell us that they're returning a call and we can get them to the appropriate place. Now we're looking at being able to actually pull that data set back from our back-end system. So we would actually already know, we called you on this and we could actually route you. So that is actually one of the things that we have in work. A couple other things around just kind of the data and the analytics that we're looking at. We spend a lot of time for us trying to map the overall journey for the customer through the IVR and then into our call centers. And so we can see kind of that whole thing. the whole trail that they're going and where they get transferred out. And that's the type of data that we use to fine-tune our IVR. And we do quite a bit of work on this, and we actually do have monthly releases for our IVR. So we're always kind of fine-tuning it and finding things, and have grammar tunings and things like that done by West, and traffic light studies and things of that. And one of the big things, and it's not that we highlighted this, but we also partner with the rest of the organization. As ADT tries to reduce or improve its retention, then we were able to implement some high-risk functionality inside the IVR where we can actually see if you're a high-risk customer, then we can actually send you to basically our high-risk team, which kind of gives you that white glove treatment. And we've seen considerable success out of that program.
Hey, Chris, this is Dan. So you used
Yes.
this term, and you kind of blew through it a little bit, and I maybe spend a little bit of time talking about predictive intent, how you defined it, how you're using it, and what the impact has been of that. Because I think there are companies out there on the phone, I'm sure, that are like, maybe what's predictive intent, and how are you guys using that? What's been your experience with it?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, predictive intent is basically our attempt at trying to guess why you're calling without you actually providing us any information. We have so for example, for our automatic recurring payments, if your credit card is about to expire and you do call us, we can see that. And then while you're on the phone, we can ask you, would you like to update your expiration date on your credit card? And then you can kind of go through that process. And that's been one of our very successful programs, because generally, and a long time ago, what happened was the credit card would expire, they wouldn't be able to make payments anymore, and then we'd have to resort to just sending paper statements out saying that they need to update their credit card, right? But a lot of times people wouldn't even see those type of things, and then people were threatened to go into like collection type things if they weren't careful. Since then we've implemented email campaigns where we'll send out emails on this, but still this has been really successful in us, and we find that people don't actually call so much into the IVR to make this change, but when we actually say, hey, we notice your expiration date is coming up, then we actually get a lot of traction through that. A few other things that we use predictive intent for is appointments, as I mentioned earlier. So we're able to see if you have an upcoming installation appointment or a service appointment, and we can kind of take you through the track to see if you're looking to confirm it, or do you need to reschedule, or do you need to cancel it, and then based on that we can get you into the right place. We also do it for billing as well, so we can see that you have a payment that's due within the next 7 days, and we can ask you about that as well. We also do it around some alarm prompting. So there are cases where we can actually see if your alarm is actually going off right now. Then we can just say, hey, are you calling about your alarm going off? And we can get those people to the right place. Kind of in the same vein, but it's not. This is not necessarily to the customer's benefit, but also we actually check delinquency levels and things of that nature. And so if we see that, then we can actually hijack those customers as well. We'll try to actually offer them the ability to self-serve inside the IVR and make their payment settle the account. But if not, then we can actually get them to an agent as well, so they can arrange for payment arrangements or whatnot. So that's kind of some of the ways that we're using it right now.
Chris, I'm going to jump in. This is Chad. Just an FYI, there's a lot of fading in and out, so just please make sure that the microphone there is close to you. Thank you. Dan, also, we're getting more questions about more examples maybe you could provide, Dan, or situation that we're kind of discussing. Within your client group, any other thoughts come to mind?
I think when we've worked with clients in different industries, I think voice is a great place to start. It drives a lot of traffic, and I think to Chris's point around the use of data and analytics, I think as you go through and you do an assessment of what the experience in the IVR looks like today versus what do you really want it to be, there's opportunities to drive to sort of changing the business process, and I think that's where some real value that our customers experience with the use of customer journey mapping and analytics kind of together. They're able to go back and say, geez, I see why people are calling, and if I can prevent some of those calls from happening, by either reaching out to them proactively, so integrating some other voice channel, outbound channel, or non-voice outbound channel. How can I prevent some of those calls? Chris talked about mapping the journey, trying to, or discovering, if you will, where customers are falling out of the IVR. So we do a lot of that journey mapping with clients, and we work with them to say, hey, here's where they're falling out, and here's why. So let's use the data and analytics to address the cause, not necessarily just the symptom, right? So if we understand where they're falling out, for example, in the IVR, and we can address that proactively and eliminate that call from coming in, that's a much better customer experience. Or, to Chris's point, if we can use natural language and predictive intent to understand or evaluate, guess, if you will, using some data and analytics and make an educated guess as to why they're calling, that again improves the customer experience. So I'll go back to that flight example, right? So I'm calling in. If there's data connectivity and there's context between those channels, and they say, "Ooh, we just sent Dan a text message, and now he's calling," that predictive intent is pretty easy to go, I'm pretty sure I know that this is Dan, it's his phone, we sent him this message, and he's calling to address his flight, for example. So we do that quite a bit across our different client groups, and Chris is pointing out some of those different ways that they've done sort of integration of inbound and outbound together to change how the customer is experienced with ADT. So one of the unique things that Chris mentioned at ADT is, many of the people they're reaching out to aren't actually customers. I mean, I live in Omaha, and my parents live here. I'm the only one that lives here. I get the phone calls when my parents are out of town from ADT when their alarm goes off, and I'm not, I'm not personally a customer of ADT. So that's a different experience that is, being provided by ADT that might be different than my parents who, are a customer and are within a certain segment of ADT, for example.
So Dan, again, no surprises on the poll. I think that we said majority of people have done their own acting like a customer, calling in, doing the journey mapping, and still maybe succeeding or not succeeding. And there's probably different points to that. We go back and constantly relook at and evaluate. One of the things we hear is that IVR is a dying channel, or is IVR a nuisance channel? What are your thoughts on that? I know it depends on industry, but...
Yeah, I think it depends on industry, and I think it depends on point in time in the customer life cycle. So I would argue, Chad, that many of us as consumers make a channel choice based on a trade-off between urgency and complexity. And the more urgent and the more complicated we view that interaction to be, the more likely we are to want to talk to somebody. And so that becomes, IVR, for example, in an agent becomes points of escalation as opposed to, points of, I'm checking on my balance. I mean, there's so many other ways to do that today that I don't need to make a phone call. And so when the phone call does happen, in the care world, oftentimes it's a point of escalation. If you look at the front end from a marketing perspective, acquisition perspective, I think the stats are 57% of all inbound phone calls in the acquisition space are revenue-generating calls. They're a result of web search. So you're on your mobile phone, you're web searching for your restaurant, and you click the call. 57, almost 60% of those phone calls are revenue-generating calls, are really valuable calls. So I don't know that IVR is a dying channel. I think it's changing the mix with respect to why customers are using that channel. And in doing inbound and outbound together in our organization, we always thought that by providing outbound services and voice and non-voice solutions that we would see degradation in inbound. And quite frankly, it's been the opposite.
Yeah.
We've experienced more growth in inbound.
Well, thank you for that, Dan, and we have so many questions coming in. Thank you, everybody, and I'll try to answer. And this intent of this webinar is not about IVR. It's a channel amongst many channels. Maybe we should have a webinar, is IVR alive or dead, and focus just on the IVR piece of it. But it is interesting for debate. I'll give one other quick question here, Dan, and I know we've got to move on with the eye on time, is understand the way we are using the IVR, but isn't the real issue the CRM? Could someone speak about that? And I'm assuming CRM being the data dilemma to some degree, data influx.
So say the question again, Chad, I'm sorry. is the real issue about CRM and not the IVR?
Correct. That's sort of the question comment. And I want to get your reaction, Dan.
So, it's probably a nice segue into the last component of what we wanted to address in this conversation, which is around silos. And oftentimes, it's a great question about, is it really about CRM? I'd broaden it to say, isn't it really about data and silos that exist in the organization, some of those around data. So, go back to this integrated contact center, and one of the contingencies or one of the values of having an integrated contact center is that data component and operating off of the same data set. So it's not just limited to CRM data necessarily, but it could be limited to the back-end analytics of, not just your Salesforce database, for example, or the stuff that houses your customer relationship management, but it also houses all of the back-end metrics and measurements that you're using to value the rest of your business. It's a more integrated feedback management system that is, maybe it contains survey data, maybe it contains event-based survey data, maybe it contains social media data. I always tell people, look, you don't necessarily need to survey your customers to know what they're saying about you and your brand. Just go to social media because it's there. So it's an integration of a bunch of different data that's coming together and how you use that data to change the experience. So I agree. I mean, it's about data, but it's about how you use the data to change business processes to change the experience.
Well, I think well stated, that last comment for sure, Dan. I completely echo and agree to that. So what I would recommend is that we've got so many questions. Let's continue through the rest of the webinar, and then maybe after we conclude with what we've got prepared, we could get in some quick rapid fire of these questions coming through.
Perfect. So we talked about keeping it simple. We talked about where to start, ADT and Chris to start in voice channels. There's all kinds of unique ways to start that journey based on your own organization. And I segued a little bit into silos and the types of silos that are affecting customer experience and the management of that. So we're going to take one more quick poll and talk about the types of silos that you may be experiencing in your own organization. They could be functional silos that are related to departments like finance, marketing, sales. They could be channel silos that are related to ownership of web and the call center, maybe the retail outlet, maybe the mobile application, for example. Or, is your organization, are they facing both types of silos?
So the poll is active right now. If everyone could just take a minute, we'll quickly rifle through this one. Just 10 more seconds, and we're going to close it down here. And again, really, everyone's been great participants in today's webinar and participating in the polls and the data that we've learned. So let's go ahead and close this poll and show the results. Reaction, Dan?
Yep. Yeah, it can be a little bit of both. I'm not surprised that there's both silos that are affecting businesses today. And I would say regardless of what you're experiencing, some functions like marketing and finance or sales, they think they own the customer. And there are other channel silos, as you guys have well experienced, that hey, I run the web and I've got my own customers and they're mine because they're in my channel at that point. And I think the key, regardless of your answer, whether it's one or the other or both, is to understand how those silos are impacting your customer's experience and how to address those silos from your customer's view. So I think that's the value. And if you can take a look at why do we have functional silos, why do we have channel silos, and how do I break those down from the customer's view and how that impacts the journey, I think there's real value. So if you would, we'll just go down back to the PowerPoint slide and the presentation and have Chris talk a little bit about his internal silos and what he's experienced and what they've done at ADT to address some of what he's experienced.
Sure, yeah. So certainly at ADT, we definitely experience both the functional silos and the channel silos. And our experience lately, we've been really kind of working towards fixing our functional silos. As an example, our whole sales IVR structure was actually all sitting on auto attendance, not on IVR, where our care IVR is being hosted through West. has the ability to dip into the back end to find all this data, whereas the sales auto attendants didn't have any of that sort of capacity. And we actually sat at this solution really for over 2 years now before finally migrating the sales IVR stuff over to West, and so it can actually leverage those data pools that we're actually using today. And so I think that's kind of been challenging because they're definitely different organizations run by different people who have different expectations and different ideas of how to do that. So as we try to combine those are the types of challenges we've been seeing. And our goal really with this is really to kind of normalize this customer experience, provide the same sort of customer experience, the same sort of voice, the same sort of phrasing when we're talking about our prompting and things of that nature, and to utilize those same data sets. Oftentimes, over half the people that call into our sales numbers are actually existing customers. So, that's, if we know that data by being able to pull it from the back end and we know your existing customer, then we know you're either calling to upgrade or actually you're just calling to get to the care, but this is the phone number that you had. So those are some of the types of challenges that we've been going through, and I think a lot of it is just kind of it's personalities and working with other people and just trying to make sure that we're always on top of that and that everybody understands that the customer experience that we're trying to provide and the offerings that we have. So actually, once people really started to see that all what we could do with all this data, it really started having people come to our door and say, hey, we want this ability too. It's just ADT has a quite complicated telecom system that we're actually trying to really simplify, and this is part of that, getting everybody over into kind of one platform. As far as channel silos, we also have that problem, and it's definitely, we recognize it specifically with MyADT. We're not at that point where you can call into the IVR and we can realize what you were doing with MyADT. But that is definitely something we're looking at, as we're rolling out functionality for the ability to reschedule your installation or your service appointments on MyADT. We're also doing the same thing on our IVR. MyADT, that functionality went live, and we're not quite live with the IVR, but one of the things we struggle with is, okay, how do we know that somebody tried to reschedule an appointment in MyADT, therefore it's not going to work in the IVR because it actually all uses the same back-end web services and the web calls and things of that nature. So definitely we have some challenges and some future growth for the channel silos as well.
So Chris, real quick, tactically speaking, do you guys have cross-functional scheduled meetings to address kind of these silos and how you need or what you need from other parts of your organization to address this, or how does that work tactically?
Yeah, actually we do now. So we actually have an IVR steering committee. It's fairly recent because for most of the past 2 years, the IVR mostly been run by the care organization. But now as the IVR is taking on a more enterprise role, as we're pulling in the technician IVR, which is more of a field support, which is its own business unit, and now we're pulling in sales, which is its own business unit. We've had to step back and realize, okay, that the IVR is really an enterprise solution, and as that, we need to actually set up a steering committee. We need to have people from every single business unit to attend these, and so it helps with the communication sharing. It helps with kind of the prioritization of our product backlog and things of that nature. And that way there's no surprises. So when we start using some new data set and care, then sales is aware of it. Or even this week, I was talking to one of the sales guys, and they're actually looking for the same feature that we're pushing for the care IVR. So now it's added more weight. There's an extra benefit so that we can push for funding to migrate to that new requirement and solution.
Great, thanks. Chad, when we put this webinar together, we were a little concerned we'd have enough content. It's clear that we had plenty. We probably could make a couple of other points, but we got 5-ish minutes left, and it sounds like you've got quite a few questions. Do you want to move to kind of Q&A right now, and Chris and I could probably talk for 20 more minutes on this topic, but given the time frame, does it make sense to address some Q&A?
Yeah, here's what I like to propose, and to keep in the commitment of our hour with our guest, and for those that would like to stay on for a more detailed Q&A, we'll keep on another 15 minutes. But let's wrap up with kind of lessons learned here and the takeaways. I've got a couple of data points I wanted to share as we wrap up, and then we'll move to those that would like to stay on for our Q&A segment. So, Dan, on this last slide here, what do you really want to encourage, advocate, and push to the listeners today?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of things. I think one is take the time to really know your customer and not only go through the experience that your customer has, but map that against the desired experience that you have. And write it down, put it on paper, and map out the desired experience and compare the real experience or the actual experience to it. Second would be, find ways to break down those silos internally, whether they're functional silos or channel silos or both, and find ways like Chris and ADT described to have some sort of cross-functional meeting so that you can address changes in processes and programs that might affect one other area of your company. And until you start to have those collaborative sessions, it's hard to know where you might be able to sort of rinse and repeat other processes and projects across other components of your business. So find ways, encourage ways to identify and break down the silos. And then the third thing I would kind of urge people to think about or to do is, start simple. Start small, get some traction, find a place where you think that there's value to your customer based on, some data and analytics and input from them and feedback that you receive from them, and where you're going to provide some business value to your own organization. Compare those two things and find a place where you can start simply and start small. And for Chris and ADT, it was, hey, we can do some things in voice and non-voice channels around inbound and outbound communication that will lessen some of the calls we make or calls that we receive internally and free up some of our agents to do the more complicated calls, and we can take away some of the inbound calls by integrating outbound. So find ways to kind of start simply and start small and gain some traction and momentum. You don't have to solve everything at the same time. You don't have to address every single channel today. Those would be the things that I think that would be valuable for people on the phone to take away.
Well, Dan, thank you, and I'm so glad that these webinars are recorded so we all can go back and listen and take notes and revise some of the thoughts that we shared today. Dan, just real quick for our listeners, if anyone would like to get a hold of you, quickly, what is the best way for them to reach you?
They can reach me at dggordon@west.com, or they can log on to westinteractive.com.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate it. So I just want to say to our listeners before we move into the extended Q&A section, and if you can remain with us, that's fantastic. For all of our leaders out there, we're very excited about our next leadership gathering, the Customer Response Summit Seattle. It'll be taking place September 28th through the 30th. We'll have 200 of the brightest customer executive leadership minds in that two-day gathering. The advisory board will be there and so many others. So if you'd like to get more details about our plans and what we're going to be doing in our next leadership gathering, please email chad@execsintheknow.com or look at our website, execsintheknow.com. Dan and Chris, I really want to thank you very much for your time. Dan, I hope you come back again at some point and help play expert witness with us. So for this, I've kept to my hour commitment, those that have to get back to work. Thank you for listening. Please share and complete the survey you'll receive at the end of the webinar today. I would appreciate that. And we're now going to move into 15 minutes of an extended Q&A for those that can remain with us. So, Dan, I'm going to, we hit a bit of a fester, I think, with the IVR component of it. And I have very specific IVR questions. A number of them came in there, and then there's some other general questions. I'll start with some general, then I'll get a little more specific to, there were so many IVR questions that came in. Lorraine, who I know is a great leader out in our space, she asked, will all the channels need to continue with both, will all of the channels need to continue both current and emerging? A little clarification on there, Dan, but I think that we're going to continue to see all channels, obviously, over the next period of time. Traditional still going to be the lion's share. I think the big one that we all got to keep an eye on is going to be interactive self-help, interactive care. Dan, I don't know if you want to debate that at all, but I think that's, if I had to put my money on any of them, I would say I'd keep my eyeball to self-service.
Yeah, and I guess I would answer that maybe a little bit differently with respect to, it depends on, my view is it depends on where in the customer life cycle you are. And if it's care, then I would agree with what you're stating, Chad.
Yeah,
yeah, and I also think that, you know, if we look at, from a healthcare perspective, wearable technologies in that channel is going to continue to grow, and the whole, you know, application to person interaction is going to continue to grow, and organizations are going to have to quickly figure out how those are going to fit into different components of the customer life cycle. So from a care perspective, let me give a real example. A wearable device that takes your blood pressure and sends that reading to a doc. That's a care type application, if you will, and it's a wearable device. It's really a one-way A to P type communication that would then drive something different from the brand or from the provider in terms of communication. So I mean, there are probably channels that I don't even think of today that are going to happen. So,
yeah.
And I don't see channels necessarily like disappearing. I mean, social media is not going away. People are going to continue to have peer-to-peer communities and peer-to-peer conversations in social media and help themselves and help each other in social media. What your role is in that, I think you have to figure that out.
Yeah, and I'm going to cut it short and keep moving. Thank you for that. We're just going to keep it as concise and as quick as we can. In the bucket of what I call under channel management, and we have buckets of data analytics and data and then the IVR piece, but sticking within the theme of channel management, one of our callers, Philip, he deals with an older demographic, predominantly, let's say, senior citizens, 75 plus, and, you know, obviously they're finding they're getting increasing feedback. This group simply doesn't want to do IVR, social media, email. I don't know if there's any insights that you have, Dan. My thought to Philip and others is that serve them in their channel that they want to be served. Know your customer, and if telephone is it and that's it, then do it the best you can. Make it the absolute best channel possible. Offer the other channels, but you know, at the end of the day, serve them well and where they want to be served. I mean, Dan, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, yes, and I would agree with you, Chad. I think as consumers, I think regardless of industry, we want our experience to be smart, we want it to be fast, we want it to be empowered, and we want it to be personal. And I don't think those are going to change. And if you try to drive your customers into channels that are convenient for you, you're going to cause friction and frustration, and you're going to lose them. So if that demographic is you know, they have a certain preference and a channel of choice, and that's where the customer experience happens most frequently, make that a really, really solid, good channel. And maybe you can drive them into other places at some point, but man, force them into channels, a recipe for trouble.
Last channel question, Dan. SMS. I hear SMS taking off. I read that 90% open rates are the possibilities. This is very appealing as long as you have an opt-in, opt-out process, manage client preferences. Do you have any insights what you're seeing on the SMS growth? I mean, I will say it's growing hands down, but I mean, anything particular you want to share on SMS?
Yeah, I think the next evolution of SMS is two-way SMS and A to P SMS. So two-way SMS meaning, you know, I send you an SMS to tell you your flight's canceled, and I want to respond to that. We send hundreds of thousands of prescription refill reminders and prescription ready reminders for customers, and you'd be shocked at how many people respond to those SMS, one-way SMS, with things like, thank you, how did he open, remind me what store it's at. And so when you do that proactive reach, Chad, oftentimes people in that channel expect that there's somebody on the other end of it. So I think the SMS chat, if you will, SMS Assistant's a product we have. It's an SMS chat platform. That's going to continue to grow as well. And then the application an application sending me a text, that's going to continue to grow. So it's not going to change. I also don't think it's going to erode much of the voice channel either. I really don't.
Okay. I'm going to move into one segment of data analytics, and just in spirit of our 15-minute overage here, data analytics. This could go to you or Chris or Dan. We all get and understand the need to know our customers. We all subscribe into that. But do you have any recommendations on the type of metrics to use? NPS, CES, FCR? A big question again, but would there be anything that jumps out? I guess, Dan, from your thoughts.
There's a lot of debate industry-wide about how people are measuring the experience and what tools they're using and how they're how companies are measuring satisfaction. I think it's contingent upon or related to your business. First call resolution, those sorts of things, I think are difficult to continue with respect to the channel proliferation and the silos within channels and compared to how we interact with brands. And so what I mean by that is I may access 3 or 4 different channels to solve one problem, and each channel is going to say, I resolved Dan's interaction the first time he called. Well, not necessarily true. So I think those traditional metrics are losing steam in favor of things like NPS and customer friction scores. And I think the experience, the customer experience scores are going to continue to evolve, and you're going to see things beyond NPS gain traction. I don't know what those are, Chad, quite frankly, but I think that there's going to be more metrics and more time devoted to how do I measure the experience, not how do I measure the interaction.
Chris, do you have anything you want to echo?
Not too much around this, as while we do those customer stat things mostly for the kind of experience, they're not really targeted towards our IVR. And so generally speaking, when we're looking at digging in and trying to find what sort of experiences people are having through IVR, we actually will go through listening to call recordings. We just actually wrapped up a study where we had a consultant go through 500 calls and things of that nature, and you're able to get a pretty good sense of how people are enjoying the experience by just sensing their frustration level in their voice if they're kind of getting stuck in certain prompts. And certainly we've identified some areas that we need to tackle in that regard, but we haven't got to the customer sat stuff with in regards to the IVR, although there has been some discussions on it.
Okay. And before I get into the IVR nerve that we seem to hit today, Chris, is there anything that you just want to leave in sort of follow thoughts and comments? I know you've shared a lot of different pieces on your side, but any recommendations for the listeners, either where to start, best practices, lessons learned, gotchas, anything that just sort of jumps out that you would like to share as best practice or an awareness?
I guess one thing I would say is, while you are trying to keep it simple and kind of get something off the ground fast so you can actually start gathering data and then start fine-tuning, one kind of lessons learned that we had that on our side was our reporting wasn't quite set up to provide the amount of detail that we really wanted, and it wasn't something we noticed until it was a little bit too late. We were already out and we needed the data now. So I would just pay a lot of attention to making sure the reporting is set up immediately once you roll out something new so you can get immediate feedback. We spent a couple of iterations and cycles just trying to fine-tune our reporting so we could get our reporting set up a little better, and actually we're actually migrating now to transactional logging and MicroStrategies with West as we speak, which will be released next month. So that should really help us. But I think that was one issue that I wish we would have thought a little bit more about before we rolled out.
Okay, very honest, very candor. Appreciate that. And again, Chris and Dan, thank you. And we're going to move to the last segment of our extended Q&A. I don't know where or how in our conversation, but somehow we extended a bit of a nerve in the IVR discussion and debate, which is great. That's what we love at Execs. I know we want to talk real issues, needs, conversations, and look forward. So I'll throw a couple out here where there's difference of opinions. I completely understand that. One of the things that came out was, should you or we be concerned with consistency in regards to IVR in the channel mix? I don't know more what they're thinking in that question with consistency, Dan, but how would you want to respond potentially to that in regards to consistency in IVR?
I'm like you, I guess maybe I'm not quite sure what the context of the question is. You know, if I look at consistency in the IVR experience itself, I guess I would address that question with consistency from the experience depending on the segment of the customer base. And what I mean by that is, you know, ADT's got different segments of their customer base, and how they treat them and route them in the IVR is a little different. But I think it's consistent upon the segment of the customer base. And I think more and more organizations are looking at, you know, how do I segment who calls me? How do I use predictive intent to create a consistent experience? So I think that's probably one kind of vein to think about. Maybe another vein in that would be consistency as it relates to other channels. And again, maybe the answer, or maybe the gist or the genesis of the question was about, you know, will IVR continue to be around, and will it be consistent throughout time? And again, I think it will be. I don't think that you're going to see an elimination. You might see some degradation over time of IVR and voice. We honestly, our customers haven't really experienced that. The integration of other channels has grown the call volume. It's changed the amount of time within the call, for example, but it hasn't really changed the number of calls. So I still think that there's a rationale reasoning and some consistency, or a need for consistency with IVR within your channel mix. So I guess I'm kind of addressing it in those two ways. There might be another way to think about it, Chris, that maybe I'm not. That maybe
I think we should. Yeah, I think we should move on. I think from what the context we have, we've answered it. I would suggest that particular listener, if they would like to reach out to you directly, Dan, they may do so.
Fair enough.
Perfect. Another quick one is a question. What about Contact Me feature on a website where the call is in the point of connecting to the live rep via outbound calling? Will IVR be one of the many channels, multi-channel? Does that clarify a little bit, Dan, what they were asking? Contact Me from the website, being a point of contact to a live rep via outbound calling. How will the IVR be one of the many channels?
So I think that's a good question. And I think you know, the web can be programmed to do just about anything you really want it to. If Contact Me doesn't necessarily have to mean a form that is filled out on the web, it could mean click to chat. It could mean click to call, and it could mean that, you know, when you click Contact Me and you give that option of you want us to call you, that there's an integration point of the IVR. And I think, you know, don't think of IVR just as an inbound thing. Think of IVR as inbound and outbound, and using the IVR to reach out to customers that want you to contact them. And I think there's integration of scheduling to do that. So Contact Me when is it convenient? I want you to call me at 1:15 because that's when I'm free and I got time to talk about my flight, or, you know, the ski jacket I want to buy. So I absolutely think IVR can be integrated into web and a Contact Me component.
Perfect. Well, what I will do, Dan, is I will bucket the rest of these questions and get them on over and see if there's ways we can individually get with everybody. I am concerned about the time. We've extended to our 15-minute overage on the Q&A. So obviously, Dan, there's a lot of discussion needed and continued thirst for this. I really want to thank all of our listeners today. I'd encourage you to get involved with Execs in the Know, as we are your advocates for your service leadership and looking for ways to help you in your journeys of customer success. Dan, Chris, great, appreciated your time. I know we've had some planning to do this, so that doesn't come easy, and thank you for that. We will now conclude today's webinar, and please complete the survey post-webinar, and the recorded link will come out tomorrow, Wednesday, to your inbox. Everyone have a great day. Thank you again for today's webinar.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.